I don't even know how to dance in heels, Julianne Zeller muttered under her breath as she clutched the edge of a champagne table, eyeing the swirling crowd at the Manhattan Conservatory's annual winter gala. Her best friend, Leela, had begged her to come as her +1 after her date bailed last minute. Julianne had worn the only formal dress she owned, navy blue satin, a little too simple for the glittering ballroom but passable under dim lights. She felt like a misplaced puzzle piece in a sea of couture gowns and polished tuxedos. "Just smile and pretend you belong," Leela had whispered before vanishing into the crowd with a man who had handed her a glass of $1,000 champagne like it was tap water. Julianne exhaled, fixing the strap of her dress. She shouldn't have come. She had 2 job interviews the next week, a mountain of student loans, and a fridge back home that only contained mustard and baking soda. She didn't have time for charity galas where people used the word portfolio more than please. The string quartet shifted into a slow, sweeping waltz. Couples began moving toward the dance floor. That's when she felt it, a tap on her shoulder. She turned around and blinked. The man standing in front of her looked like he had stepped straight out of a movie. Tall, dark suit tailored to perfection, dark brown hair that looked like it had never known the word humidity, and eyes so piercingly blue they nearly knocked the breath out of her. "Would you dance with me?" His voice was low and calm, like it didn't matter whether she said yes or no, but something in his tone made it impossible to say no. Julianne hesitated. "I'm not very good." "I'm not asking for perfection," he said, holding out his hand. "Just one dance." She placed her hand in his. He smiled, almost like he'd won something, and led her onto the floor. The ballroom lights dimmed further as the music swelled, and Julian's hand rested awkwardly in his while the other landed on his shoulder. "I'm Julianne," she said quickly, trying to fill the silence. "Nico," he replied. "Nico Maddox." His hand settled securely at her waist, guiding her in a perfect rhythm. It took her a second to realize he was actually leading her properly, with ease, as if she knew what she was doing. "You're good at this," she said, cautiously impressed. "So are you," he said, looking down at her. "You just don't know it yet." Julianne laughed, a little breathless. "Are you always this confident with strangers?" "Only when they're wearing navy blue and looking like they don't belong here," she flushed. "Is it that obvious?" "No," Nico said, his gaze lingering on her face, "but I notice things." They danced for the full 3 minutes. When the music ended, Julianne stepped back, expecting the spell to break, but Nico didn't let go. "Another?" he asked. She hesitated. "I should really find my friend. She's with someone named Chase who just offered her a seat at his private table," Nico said smoothly, nodding toward a corner of the ballroom. Julianne blinked. "How do you know that?" "I told Chase to invite her." She frowned. "Why would you?" "Because I wanted more than one dance," he said simply. Julianne stared at him. "You're serious?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She didn't know what it was, his boldness, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, or maybe the way her heart was pounding, but she stayed. They danced again, and again. By the 4th song, she was laughing. By the 5th, she was asking him things she didn't usually ask strangers. Like where he grew up, New York, what he did, finance stuff, he said vaguely, and why he was alone tonight. "I don't like being set up," he said. "It makes people pretend." "So this," she asked, "isn't pretending?" He looked at her seriously. "It's the first real thing I've felt all night." Julian's breath caught. They danced until the music paused for a toast. Nico led her to a velvet-backed chair at the edge of the room, summoned a waiter with a flick of his hand, and handed her a glass of something that tasted like champagne but better. "You're not like these people," she said cautiously. "No, you're not. Showing off. Or name-dropping. Would it ruin it if I did?" he asked, tilting his head. She stared at him. "You're someone, aren't you?" "I'm someone who wants to see you again," he said. "Tomorrow." Julianne blinked. "You just met me. I danced with you," he said, like that explained everything. "And I don't let go." Something about the way he said it made her heart race. "I don't know," she said, uncertain. "I'm not part of this world. I work 2 jobs just to pay rent." "I don't care," he said instantly. "You say that now, I mean it now." "And I'll mean it tomorrow." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time that night she believed him. Okay, she said softly. I'll see you tomorrow. Nico's smile was quiet, like he'd just won something no money could buy. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black card with nothing but a gold embossed address. Be there at 7, no pressure, just dinner. Julian took it, heart pounding, and when Nico leaned in and kissed her cheek, barely a brush, she felt it all the way down to her toes. As she left the ballroom, she didn't know she'd just danced with one of the richest men in the country. And she definitely didn't know he would never let her go. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk outside the tall black glass building, the golden address from the card gleaming just above the revolving doors. She was early by at least 15 minutes, but pacing in her apartment had done nothing except make her more anxious. If she hadn't left when she did, she might have talked herself out of coming altogether. She tugged at the sleeve of her dark maroon wrap dress, one she'd borrowed from Leela, who'd insisted the color made her eyes look deeper. Her hair was pinned up in a twist she hadn't worn since college, and her heels modest, practical ones tapped nervously against the concrete. A man in a sleek navy overcoat stepped out from the entryway and held the door open without saying a word. Julian swallowed. Then moved. Inside, the lobby was hushed and cavernous. A single chandelier hung above like a glass constellation. No receptionist, no noise. Just a private elevator already waiting for her, its brushed gold doors gleaming. She stepped in. The doors slid shut. There were no floor numbers, just a small screen that displayed her name in delicate script, her fingers curled around her clutch. Okay, she whispered. This is fine. When the doors opened again, she stepped into an entirely different world. The penthouse stretched out in front of her like a dream, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the Manhattan skyline, warm lighting spilling from artfully hidden fixtures. A curved white sofa that looked too beautiful to sit on. And beyond that, a dining table set for two with crystal glasses and a bottle already uncorked. Nico stood beside it, sleeves rolled up, a navy linen shirt slightly open at the collar. He looked like he'd been waiting not impatiently but with certainty, like this evening was a given. I thought you might change your mind, he said, his eyes sweeping over her. I almost did, Julian admitted, but you didn't, he said, already pouring her a glass. That matters. She took the flute from him and followed him to the table, trying not to stare at the skyline behind him. It looked unreal, the city glowing in a way she'd never seen, not from her apartment window, not from the subway platform. You live here? She asked. I work too much to live anywhere else, he said. This place reminds me to stop. She glanced around. It's incredible. You're not going to ask what I do? He asked, genuinely curious. I figured if you wanted to tell me you would. He leaned back slightly, watching her over the rim of his glass. I own a holding company, multiple sectors, private equity, real estate, tech. That's the short version. Julian's brow rose. So, you're not just successful, you're one of those men who owns buildings other people rent from. Sometimes, he said, but I started with nothing, no trust fund, just a lot of risk and even more mistakes. She tilted her head. You don't seem like someone who makes mistakes. I made one last year that cost me $37 million, he said casually. Mistakes keep me human, she blinked. That's not a sentence I ever thought I'd hear. He laughed, deep and unguarded, and for a moment she forgot she was supposed to feel out of place here. They sat, and dinner arrived not from a waiter, but from a private chef in the open-concept kitchen, who gave her a small nod before retreating. The plates were stunning but not overly complex. Grilled fish, roasted vegetables, something fragrant with saffron. Julian took a bite and sighed. This is ridiculous, in a good way, I hope. In a how is this my life kind of way. You don't have to be intimidated, he said gently. This isn't about testing you. Then what is it about? She asked, setting down her fork. Nico leaned forward, elbows on the table. Last night, you were the only person in that ballroom who didn't want anything from me. I noticed that in the first 10 seconds, you didn't try to impress me. You were just there, real. Julian shifted slightly, unsure what to do with that kind of honesty. I didn't know who you were. Exactly, he said. She exhaled. So what happens now? I'd like to see you again, often. She hesitated. This feels fast. I move fast when I know what I want, "And you're sure?" she asked, not challenging, just trying to understand. "I don't waste time on maybe," he said, "and I don't chase things I don't mean to keep." Julian looked at him, the city glowing behind him like a promise. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for her glass and took a slow sip. After dinner, Nico walked her to the elevator himself. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't press but waited. When the doors opened, she stepped in. He didn't follow. But just before the doors closed, he said, "Tell me if you don't want this. I'll stop." Julian met his eyes and didn't say a word. She didn't have to. As the elevator descended, her heart was louder than the hum of motion. She didn't know what this was becoming, but she knew it had already started. Julian stepped into the entryway of the West Village bookstore and shook the cold drizzle from her umbrella. The warmth inside wrapped around her instantly, shelves packed with dog-eared novels, a faint scent of cinnamon and soft jazz floating from a speaker near the register. She spotted Nico near the back, crouched beside a low shelf in the history section, flipping through a hardcover. She hadn't expected him to show. He'd asked her casually over the phone the night before if she wanted to meet somewhere quieter. She'd picked this place. He'd said yes, without hesitation. Now, seeing him here in a charcoal sweater and jeans, hair slightly tousled from the wind, she felt something shift again, something she wasn't ready to name. "You're early," she said, walking up to him. He looked up, a faint crease between his brows. "I didn't want to risk missing you." Julian raised an eyebrow. "What, you thought I'd bolt?" "No," he said as he stood, sliding the book back in place. "But I've found that people who are worth knowing don't always stay where you leave them." She didn't quite know how to respond to that. So she looked at the title he'd been flipping through. "You read about the Ottoman Empire in your spare time. I like knowing how people rise and how they fall." He dusted his hands. "History repeats more than we think." A young woman behind the counter waved at Julian, her roommate's cousin, who worked weekends here. Julian waved back, trying not to feel self-conscious. "I used to come here after class," she said. "When I needed to feel like I wasn't failing at everything." Nico didn't fill the silence with platitudes, he just waited. "I almost dropped out twice," she continued. "Once because of money, once because I thought I didn't belong in the room." "Did anyone tell you that?" he asked. "Not directly," she said, "but sometimes silence is worse than words." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "You finished anyway." "Barely. I walked across that stage in shoes I borrowed and a cap I couldn't afford to keep." His gaze didn't flick away. "You didn't run then." "Don't run now," Julian swallowed, heat rising in her throat. "This thing between us, it's not just dinner and bookstore meetups, is it?" "No," he said, "it's not." "Then what is it?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I want to find out." "With you," she looked down at her hands, then up at him, "I don't have the kind of life that fits into yours." "You don't have to fit into mine," he said. "I want to build something that fits us both." Her chest tightened. "People don't say things like that unless they want something." "I do want something," he admitted. "Time with you." Julian glanced around the store at the quiet couples, the man reading at the back table, the girl in the corner with a stack of poetry books. Then her eyes returned to him. "Let's walk," she said. They left the bookstore and headed down the street, the rain now just a mist. He didn't take her hand, didn't push, but he stayed close, matching her pace. "You always this intentional?" she asked. "I've had to be," he said. "You don't build what I've built by being casual with anything. Must be exhausting." "It is," he said without apology, "but I've made peace with that." They passed a florist locking up for the night. Nico paused, stepped forward, and spoke to the woman through the metal grate. A few seconds later, she handed him a single white tulip. He turned and offered it to Julian. "For what?" she asked. "For showing up," he said. She stared at the flower. Then took it. They ended up at a quiet wine bar tucked between two brownstones. Inside was dim and warm, with candles flickering on each table. No one looked twice at them. They sat in a booth near the back, and Nico ordered a bottle without looking at the menu. The waiter nodded and disappeared. Julian leaned back. "You always this?" "Certain, only when I've already made up my mind," he said. "And you've made it up about me?" "Yes." "Why?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I feel more like myself when I'm with you than I do in any boardroom or penthouse." And I don't want to lose that. Julianne laced her fingers around the base of the tulip, her voice low. You don't know half of what my life really looks like. Then show me, he said. The wine came and they clinked glasses. The conversation turned lighter: books they hated, cities they wanted to visit, the worst jobs they'd ever had. Nico told her about the summer he'd worked in demolition, how satisfying it had been to destroy things after a year of building numbers on a spreadsheet. She told him about working night shifts in a laundromat, watching soap operas with an old woman named Gloria who brought her lemon cookies every Thursday. By the time they left, the rain had stopped completely and the clouds had thinned just enough to let a few stars through. At the corner, Nico turned toward her. I want to see you again, he said. I figured, she said, lips twitching. He didn't laugh. I mean it. I know. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. It was unsealed, her name written in clean handwriting across the front. What's this? She asked. Just something for tomorrow, he said. You can open it when you're ready. She hesitated, then slipped it into her coat pocket. Good night, Julian. Good night, Nico. She didn't turn to look back until she reached her door. He was still standing there. Waiting, she closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and pulled the envelope from her pocket. Inside was a single card, an invitation to a private art gallery showcase. Hosted by Maddox Holdings, and beneath it a note where read, I'll be waiting. Julianne stood in front of the mirror in the dressing suite of the gallery's private lounge, her fingers still trembling slightly as she adjusted one last earring. The dress had arrived, that morning box sealed, no note, just a label with her name and the initials NM inside the collar. Crimson silk, cut clean and elegant with a neckline that made her feel powerful instead of exposed. She hadn't asked for it, but she'd worn it. Outside, through the frosted glass doors, the hum of voices grew louder by the minute. The Maddox Holdings showcase had drawn in half the city's elite, from art collectors to museum directors to people who wore tailored suits like armor. She wasn't one of them, but she wasn't hiding in the corners tonight either. She stepped out of the lounge just as a spotlight shifted to illuminate the newest installation, a series of suspended glass sculptures that refracted light like fire. The crowd turned toward it in quiet awe, but Julian's eyes found only one thing in the room: Nico. He stood near the far end of the gallery, a glass of something amber in his hand, speaking to a man in a dark velvet jacket who looked vaguely familiar from financial magazines. But Nico wasn't paying attention to him anymore. His gaze had locked onto her the second she appeared, and he didn't try to hide the way his expression changed. She walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't uncertain. You wore it, he said, voice low as she reached him. You sent it. I wasn't sure you'd accept it. I didn't, she said. I chose it. His eyes held hers for a long moment. You look like every reason I've ever said no to the wrong things. Julianne exhaled, pulse unsteady. Do you always talk like that at your own events? Only when I'm losing control. I didn't think you were the kind of man who did. Neither did I until last week. A woman approached then, someone with silver hair and a glint of familiarity in her stride. She greeted Nico with a polite nod, then turned to Julianne. You must be the one who's got him distracted. I've known Nico since he was 23 and thought cufflinks were optional. Julianne offered her hand. I didn't realize he had a history of being distracted. He doesn't, the woman said with a knowing smile. That's why it's interesting. When she drifted away, Julianne looked up at him. You told people about me? I didn't have to, Nico said. They notice things on their own. A waiter passed and Nico plucked a flute of champagne for her, pressing it into her hand. She didn't drink right away. You didn't plan this whole thing around me, did you? She asked. No, he said. But I thought if I invited you into my world, I'd know if it could hold you. And you're standing in the center of it, he said, still breathing. She took a sip then, the bubbles fizzing against her lips. What happens next? I take you somewhere quieter. Another penthouse, she asked, arching a brow. No, he said, somewhere I've never taken anyone. She hesitated for just a second, then nodded. He led her through a back corridor, past a coded security door, and into a private elevator she hadn't noticed earlier. When the doors opened again, it wasn't onto another luxury suite. It was a rooftop, no music, no guests. Just the skyline stretching around them and a small table set beneath a string of low golden lights. The air was cool but not sharp. The city was quieter up here, distant and surreal. Julian stepped forward slowly. "This is real, it's mine," Nico said. "I bought the building 5 years ago. Had this put in when I realized I needed a place to breathe." She turned to him. "And you brought me here because I don't want to breathe without you anymore." The wind caught her hair and she let it move, let it mess things up. "You don't know what I'll be like when things get hard," she said. "When I'm not in a red dress, when I'm angry or tired or scared." "I don't need perfect," he said. "I need real, and I've never been more sure of anything." Julian tilted her face toward the sky, then back to him. "What if I say yes? I'll make sure you never regret it. And if I say no, I'll wait," he said. "As long as it takes." She stepped closer. "I've never had anyone wait for me. You don't have to anymore." There was no music, no spotlight. He pulled her into his arms anyway. And they danced, slow, steady, silent. Just the sound of the city far below and the beat of her heart against his chest. When she rested her head against his shoulder, he said, "The night we met, I thought I was doing the chasing, but I think I was the one being caught." She looked up at him. "Why me?" "Because you made me want more than what I've built. You made me want something I can't sign for or buy or control." Julian reached up and touched his jaw. "Then take it," she said, "because I'm not letting go either." He kissed her, then not like the first time, not like a promise, but like a vow. The city, the lights, the money, it all blurred into the background, because in that moment all that remained was her hand in his, and the truth that had started with a single dance. He had never let go. And now neither would she. The scent of bergamot and sea salt hung in the air as Julian stepped onto the wide stone terrace, her bare feet brushing against the warm flagstone. Morning light spilled over the hills of Tuscany, the villa behind her still quiet with early sleep. She wrapped her robe tighter around her waist and leaned on the balcony edge, eyes tracing the vineyards that rolled down into the valley like green velvet. Nico appeared behind her, a mug in each hand, the sleeves of his white button-down rolled halfway up his arms. He handed her the mug without a word, brushing his thumb across her knuckles before moving beside her. She took a long sip. "You didn't tell me your company owned a vineyard." He rested his elbows on the stone. "It's a partnership. I only come here when I need to disappear, and now you've brought me. You're not part of the noise," he said. "You're the quiet I've been looking for." Julian looked over at him carefully. "You're not afraid anymore." "I was never afraid of you," he said. "I was afraid of what I'd become if I let someone in. And now," he looked at her, eyes steady, "now I want to build something I can't buy." She set her mug down. "Show me the vines." They spent the afternoon walking the rows of grapes, the sun warming their backs as Nico explained the process of harvest and fermentation with surprising tenderness. He spoke about the soil like it was sacred, the passage of seasons like it was poetry. She watched him crouch beside a cluster of grapes, inspecting the skin like it meant something more than just wine. "I like this version of you," she said. "This is me," he replied, "the part no one ever asks about." A few steps later, she paused and turned to him. "Do you remember the night of the gala?" "I remember everything," he said. "I almost walked away. I told myself you weren't real, that what you offered couldn't last." "You were wrong," he said gently. "I know that now," she said, "but I need to hear it from you." "Not with champagne or rooftop views, just like this." Nico reached for her hand. "I don't love you because you fit into my world. I love you because when you stepped into it, nothing else made sense anymore." She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She just nodded once. "Then let's stop pretending this is temporary." He pulled something from his pocket, not a ring, a key, to the house at the top of the hill, he said. "It's not finished, the walls are blank, the kitchen needs work, but it has light and silence. And space for you to build anything you want." Julian looked down at the key. "You want us to live here, I want us to build here," he said. "Not just this place, us." She took the key slowly. "There's still so much I don't know." "You'll learn," he said. "So will I." "That's the point." That night, they sat on the unfinished porch of the house Nico had built but never used, watching the sky turn gold, then violet, then deep blue. Julian leaned into his side, her fingers twined with his, their future still unwritten but no longer uncertain. 2 months later, they hosted a small gathering in that very house. No press, no event planner, just Leela, a few close friends, and the vineyard staff, who'd grown fond of Julian's habit of bringing fresh baked bread to the workers in the morning. The ceremony was simple. A linen dress, a dark suit, and vows spoken under a string of lights Nico had hung himself. When he said, "I will never let you fade into the background," Julian believed every word. As the sun dipped low behind the hills and laughter rose from the stone patio, Julian stood barefoot in the kitchen, slicing strawberries into a chipped ceramic bowl. Nico entered behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "Mrs. Maddox," he said into her neck. She leaned back into him. "That's still strange to hear. You'll get used to it." "I don't want to get used to anything," she said. "I want to notice it every day." Nico turned her gently to face him. "Then let's promise we will." They kissed, not for the first time, not for the last, but like it was both. A year later, Julian's art studio stood beside the vineyard's edge, sunlight spilling over canvases she'd once been too afraid to paint. Nico worked from the villa a few days a month, his phone less demanding, his heartbeat steadier. They had no need for galas anymore. No need for champagne to feel like celebration. Their life was quieter now, but it was full. And every night, Nico danced with her in the kitchen, the sound of an old record spinning nearby, his hands firm at her waist as if he still couldn't believe she was real. She always was. And he never let go.